you know, you don't come back to see the next Harry Potter movie because you went, oh man, the plot of the last one was so rich and you come back because you want to spend more time with these characters that you like. And I think, you know, that's the two main things that I think worked with G.I. Joe was to have characters that people wanted to spend more time with, and also to fulfill this, I thought the strongest childhood fantasy has always been about loyalty. Because, you know, let's face it, by the time you're in kindergarten, you know what disloyalty is. And, you know, every kid has been betrayed by the time they're in this first grade. So the idea of like this group of friends who are absolutely loyal is a powerful fantasy. And, you know, the fantasy of, oh, that no matter what kind of horrible situation I'm in, Snake Eyes will come to get me out of it. That's a fantasy that always works. And none of these things have anything to do with the complexities of the plot. You know, to me, a plot is just choreography. Okay? The choreography is what you got used to get in kung fu movies. They never had a plot. They just had impressive choreography. But, you know, they rarely made you want to come back for the character. That's why, you know, the main character in kung fu movies always gets killed at the end. And there's nothing to come back to.
All right, so I've got one last question that we're going to open up to you guys. Did you ever think in your wildest dreams that for 40 years you would be writing G.I. Joe?
Oh no, we all thought it was going to be over in like a year or 2 years. In fact, the common knowledge in the toy business was that no toy line lasted more than 3 years. And that if you were foolish enough to continue a toy line more than 3 years, you would be stuck with warehouses full of Cabbage Patch dolls or Beanie Babies and lose your shirt. You know, so by the time that the third year came around on the toy line, no matter how well it was doing, the common wisdom was to kill it. And that's what almost happened to G.I. Joe, except that it was doing so well that they said, I think we can milk it for one more year. And that's what opened the floodgates, when they realized that both G.I. Joe and Transformers weren't going to go away. You know, and it also it changed the whole nature of these types of comics in the comic industry. Because as soon as when the first issue of G.I. Joe hit the stands, that's when the royalty system at Marvel kicked in, and all of a sudden I was getting these enormous checks. And all these, you know, other people who had rejected doing toy comics all these years were going, give me some of that. And it really sort of, you know, both G.I. Joe and Transformers sort of really revived Marvel at the time, because they were sort of in trouble in a lot of ways. But what the G.I. Joe and Transformers thing did was, because they had TV commercials, it was pulling kids into the comic shops that would have never gone into a comic shop before. And while they were there buying G.I. Joe and Transformers, the comic shop owner could go, hey, you know, you like these? You know, you might like the X-Men. You know? Or what about Batman? And so, you know, both G.I. Joe and Transformers pulled all the other titles up with them, because all of a sudden there were thousands and thousands of more kids going into the comic shops.
Okay, does anybody have any questions for Larry?
Yeah.
Is there a character that exists, DC or Marvel or anywhere, Star Wars, that you wanted to ride, you haven't gotten to?
Sorry?
Is there a character that's in DC or Marvel or Dark Horse that you wanted to write, but you haven't gotten to?
Uncle Scrooge. I mean, the problem with the Disney license is that, you know, they yank it like every year or something. It's another company takes it over. And 3 times I've been approached about, you know, because it's pretty well known in the industry that I always wanted to do Uncle Scrooge. And, you know, we start talking, and the next thing I knew, they lose the license. That happened to me 3 times. The closest I got to it was doing Bucky O'Hare, which had ducks in it.
So first of all, thank you for not only 40 years of G.I. Joe, but your service in the Army as well. Army Corps of Engineers, combat engineering. How much of that experience?
Well, the Corps of Engineers is very different.
So combat
The
engineering.
engineer branch.
Right. So you know, stuff up and build that.
Right.
But how much of that did you draw upon for G.I. Joe? And are there any storylines or correlated with anything you experienced, or was it just simply
It's more about the characters.
more about the characters?
Yeah, then, because, you know, by the time I was doing G.I. Joe, you know, everything I knew was more than 10 years out of date. And so I would have to, you know, do the research. Do the research, and, you know, I got to know the liaison officer at, you know, Manhattan Recruiting Branch, and I had a bunch of friends. An old buddy of mine, Lee Russell, who was also an engineer in Vietnam. I got him the gig to be the military consultant for the show Tour of Duty. And he parlayed that into a sort of a career as a military technology consultant. He was the consultant for Miss Saigon on Broadway. He did work on Platoon, almost, you know, any show about soldiers. He worked on China Beach. He worked on the Young Riders and stuff like that. And he had this encyclopedic knowledge. And I used him as the main consultant on the Nam comic, because he did 2 tours in Nam, and he was one of these guys who was actually interested in the stuff. You ask a lot of vets, you know, like, he would say, "Oh, there was that tank over there. It was, you know, which model was it? I don't know. It was a tank." But he was into it. And not only was he into it, but every week he would fill a box full of stuff and ship it home to his mom's house in Brooklyn. He had, you know, indigenous manufactured unit patches. He had mimeographed unit newsletters. He had, you know, all sorts of Viet Cong stuff that he, you know, all on the black market. He had, you know, used law tubes, things that other people were throwing away, he would ship home. So when the war was over, he was one of the few people that had any of this stuff. And he was a hoarder. When Agent Orange eventually killed him. His job in the engineers was he operated an Agent Orange dispenser from the back of the deuce and a half. And never wore a mask. And he fought the VA for 20 years. And the VA never relented. Only last week that they passed that whole thing to you know, give the veterans a break on this exposure to dangerous chemicals, burn pits, and that stuff. So, you know, that was 50 years in the making. But when he passed away, he had a garage full of unbuilt model kits. He had a collection of Russian World War II sniper rifles. He had, 3 or 4 storerooms just full of Vietnam stuff. And, his wife was really ill. She had Parkinson's. She wasn't really, there. And his neighbors called and said, "Well, what are we going to do with all this stuff?" And I told him, donate whatever. Donate the massive Vietnam stuff to the Infantry Museum in Fort Benning. And see what you can get on the collector market for the rifles. And I'm sure that there must be some wholesaler or dealer out there that wants all those unbuilt model kits. So we were able to put together some money for his wife. But I don't know where I got on, so I don't know. But yeah, now I'm lost. What was I saying?
What was the question again?
Just how much you drew from actually being in the military and applying it to the story.
Yeah, that again, it's not actual events, but knowing how soldiers think and how they feel and how soldiers react to certain situations, and it's just all about soldier think. The thing about war stories is that unless you're also a veteran, you haven't heard the real stories. Because the attitude is somebody who hasn't been there is not going to understand. And won't even comprehend anything about it. There was an old thing about, a guy would get to a new unit in Vietnam, and, want to hear some war stories. Somebody would say, well, okay, the LRP team went out about 2 weeks ago, and after 3 days, we lost contact. Well, what's the rest of the story? That's it. And to somebody who's been there, that's a scary story, by itself. But the more you have to explain stuff like that, that's why people clam up. And it's also, they tell you from the get-go, don't write home to your mom and tell you what you actually do, You don't do that, I remember at the end of basic training in 1969 that, the first sergeant read a letter from the Secretary of Defense, saying, when you go home, on your first leave and you're at your mom's house, please refrain from saying, pass the fucking potatoes. Does that answer your question? Okay.
Favorite, least favorite characters?
What?
Favorite, least favorite characters?
Favorite, least favorite characters
That you worked on?
that you worked on?
Well, it's like, who's your favorite kid?
Yeah, least favorite.
Gotta pick a favorite.
I mean, I think the reason my stuff works is that I force myself to like everyone. I'm not saying, okay, this is an A-list guy and this is a B-list guy. When I'm writing that character is A-list, as far as I'm concerned. Yes, sir.
What was the motivation for Cobra and the bad guys, like being terrorists and not being like?
Well, here's the thing: is that when Hasbro came to Marvel, they had 10 GI Joe characters, and went to this meeting with Hasbro, and Archie Goodwin was there, and Jim Shooter was there, and brought up the question like, well, who are the bad guys? You know, and Hasbro said, what do you mean? G.I. Joe never had bad guys before. We said, well, they have to have somebody they're fighting. I mean, what else are they going to do? What do you want them to do? Just march? And he said, oh, okay, so maybe we should have some bad guys. You know, what should we call them? And Archie Goodwin said, well, you know, with S.H.I.E.L.D. we have, what's it called?
Hydra.
Hydra. Which is this like vague terrorist organization, you know, people are masked and all that stuff. It's sort of vaguely fascist. And he said, well, so why don't we just have something called Cobra? And there was like, no, everybody just said, oh, okay. There was no discussion. There was no, maybe, blah, blah, blah. It was just, okay. So we got Cobra. That was it. And when I sat down to write the first issue, I realized that, okay, they designed these 3 Cobra characters, the Cobra Commander and a Viper and I think a Viper officer, and none of them had faces. So if you're doing stories, the face is your agent of expression. It's hard to do drama with no faces. You got no reaction, no surprise or anger or glee or anything. So I said, okay, I got to come up with one Cobra that doesn't have a mask, and so this Cobra can react to Cobra Commander, and we see the expression. And I thought, well, if we're going to have a character without a mask, we should make her like some hot babe. And I talked to Herb Trimpe, and he said, like, yeah, let's put her in an all black leather outfit. So we came up with the Baroness. And, it took maybe a nanosecond for Hasbro to go, wow, we should make a toy out of this. Because at first they were saying they were very reluctant to have female figures because they thought to a 10-year-old boy, a female action figure is not an action figure, it's a doll. And no 10-year-old boy is going to be caught dead buying a doll. So, well, but what if we make this doll really hot? And all of a sudden, everybody wanted a Baroness. And she's still the most popular female character for cosplay. Wow.
Yeah. So I'm a pretty young Joe fan. I'm only 19. So how does it feel to have fans that are like that grew up with it, but also that stuff that you wrote can get people like me into where I show my friends and we just have a gaggle of teenagers that are just in love with the characters that you wrote. How does it feel to you?
It's amazing. I mean, considering I never, we never thought it was going to go more than 3 years.
Yeah.
And the fact every year that went by, I would just go, how is this happening? um, just amazement.
You said that they were reluctant to have female characters, so what has been your experience writing female characters?
I'm sorry for the hard hearing.
She said they were reluctant to have female characters. What is your experience with writing female characters?
Well, I thought that, that the show should be as diverse as possible, and that right from the get-go, I discovered, because I was getting 200 to 300 letters a week, and the surprising thing was that about 20% to 30% of them were girls, which, like, the other writers go, what? What's going on? And almost all of them said, well, here's the thing a lot that, that the suits don't realize is that, if you got a family with 5 siblings, whatever reading material comes into the house, almost all the kids read. So there was a journalist named Susan Faludi, who wrote for Esquire, who interviewed me. She said, she had like 6 brothers. She was the youngest child. She was the only girl. So everything she had was like hand-me-downs for her older brothers. And instead of Barbies, she got like G.I. Joes. And G.I. Joe comics to read. And she started to read G.I. Joe comics, and she had read these other Marvel comics like Fantastic Four and X-Men. She said that she felt that the main difference was that in these other superhero comics, all the women characters were like always walking around with their palms to their forehead, or like taking showers in the X-Mansion, and that in G.I. Joe, the female characters were treated totally equally and shared the same dangers and did the same job, and they were no different. And girls like that. Yeah, so that's one of the things is that I read every letter that came in, and I reacted. That's probably one reason why it did well, was that I was responding to actual readership. If the readers didn't like something, it was gone. If they liked something, the next issue there was twice as much of it. And especially the thing about the female characters.
So with G.I. Joe reaching the milestone 300, unfortunately coming to an end, what do you want to see continue with? You want to see more comic books continue, or the movies to develop, or a little bit of both? As the Godfather, what do you want to see happen?
Well, I already am writing number 301 for the new company.
Yes.
And they said, continue the same storyline, and you got free reign.
So we've got some breaking news right there, because I don't think anybody's ever heard that here.
I can't really tell you what company it is, but I can tell you that it's a go. And that the people involved at that end are actually fans. So they're not, they're not going to ask me to go neon or something.
But we got time for about one more question. It's right here.
Are you going to create any characters? Are you going to create any characters?
Any new G.I. Joe characters coming up?
There's always new G.I. Joe characters coming out. I just did, last year I introduced the first Filipino American character. Like, the entire Philippines went crazy. Because I realized, there were some some groups that we just weren't represented. So I've been trying to fix that. I mean, when I first started doing the book, I had a map of the continent of the United States and had pins, and I was trying to like distribute the birthplaces of the Joes, you know, equally around the country, you know, so that no matter where you were from, there was a Joe from Idaho, or there was a Joe from, you know, wherever. And then one year the staff at Hasbro realized that I was naming characters after my friends, you know. And they said, well, Hama can't get away with that, you know. Just, you know, we're gonna name the characters after ourselves. So they changed all the names that year to like their own names. And every single Joe that year came from Pawtucket, Rhode Island. And I took the train up there and I said, look, you know, there's a reason why these shows are, you know, okay. But you know, it didn't register on them at first.
Yeah, we have, does somebody over here have a question?
I can ask one.
Yeah, we'll do the last one here.
So, how do you find inspiration, like, you know, new ideas? Like, what kind of drives you in that arena for the story?
I don't really work that way. You know, I've never written an outline in my life. I start on page 1, and I don't know what's on page 2, or page 3 until I get to page 2. You know, that, you know, I put the Joes into a situation, you know, a fix, and I try to get them out of it. When I wrote number 21, I was writing it, I wrote it and drew it in 3 days, because we had to meet a deadline glitch. And I got to the middle of the story, and I realized that both Storm Shadow and Snake Eyes had torn their sleeves. And I thought, oh, what can I do with that? And I thought, what if they had the same tattoo? And I had used an I Ching hexagram in Iron Fist years earlier on the breastplate of Lei Kung the Thunderer. And I thought, okay, I'll use a different hexagram, one that I can remember. You know, it's got to be totally symmetrical. You know, broken line at the top, solid line alternating. And I put that tattoo on both the characters. Had no idea why it was there, or what it represented, or anything like that. And I had to come up with that 5 issues later, in 26, where I established it as being a ninja sigil, and the whole Arashikage, backstory didn't exist until I got to issue 26. People think it started in 21, but that's not the way it worked. 98% of G.I. Joe is retcon. Because I do it as I go along. I've never reread a single issue after I've handed it in. So it's a vague memory in my head of continuity. Because I'm not a continuity person, I'm a character person. And people bug me about continuity. They say, the continuity is the last thing I'm concerned with. I'm concerned with, making the characters into people that, you can relate to, walking around and either hate or love or care about. That's it.
All right, so our time is up. Larry, I want to thank you for being here, and